On the Explainer tonight, we are focusing on the budget-making process. Now, Parliament resumed sittings this week after a recess, and the first order of business will, of course, be the budget for the new financial year that begins in July. So all eyes are on Parliament right now, including those of the President, who said he would like to see how each of the MPs vote for the Finance Bill 2023. Now, whilst the focus is on the voting process, Parliament's role is much bigger and more significant than on just that one day. Let's take a look at the Constitution of Kenya 2010 and what it says. It empowers Parliament in Article 95 to determine the allocation of revenue between the national and county governments. Let's take a look at the next one. It also empowers them to do oversight over those funds. Right? So it talks about appropriating the expenditure by the national government and the national state organs. And of course, next, like I said, it's also about providing oversight over those funds once they have already been spent. Now, when we take a look at the next item, it's the Public Finance Management Act that gives MPs the power to alter the budget, more so to deal with the deficit, so that if they increase any allocation in the budget, they have to cut it from somewhere so that the budget balances. So next, they're allowed to cut the budget allocations with the intention to reduce the fiscal deficit. This here is very important, talking about the Cabinet Secretary shall take into account resolutions passed by Parliament in finalizing the budget for the relevant financial year. Pay attention to the word shall. It shall be important in just a few moments. Now, let's take a look at the process. So once all the sector working groups have presented their budgetary needs to the National Treasury, they then put together the draft budget policy statement and present it to Parliament. Let's stay here for a moment. Now, the Budget and Appropriations Committee then meets everyone who has a budget line. So that's all ministries, commissions, Auditor General, the Attorney General, even the IEBC, you name it. They all present their budget needs and justify what they're asking for. They're then informed, this is Parliament, how much money is available and what projects the government is giving priority. To help them, they have a parliamentary budget office that does the research to help them understand how to balance the books with what is available. On this one, of course, the buck does stop with them. So, ministries can still lobby and make changes side by side with parliamentary changes. Remember what we said earlier? The PFM Act says that the CS of Treasury shall take into account resolutions made by the National Assembly. Now, we all know what the word shall means in legal terms. Now, what happens is the Budget Committee then sends that statement back to Treasury, and it sends it back with recommendations, which might include cut here, add there, borrow, don't borrow, how much to borrow. Now, this would be happening around mid-April. And the Treasury will then prepare and finalize that into what is known as the printed estimates. That is what we call the budget or the budget statement. Now, there's an important deadline here, and that is that the budget, together with the finance bill, have to be tabled in Parliament by the 30th of April for the first reading. This deadline has already been met. And it is, of course, now up to Parliament to ensure that public participation, which is what you have been seeing with all the public hearings over the last few weeks, right? So the finance bill, which is the document that outlines revenue collection measures such as taxation, has to come together with the budget itself, because you see, you cannot discuss the budget without talking about how you will finance it. So those two discussions now take place at the same time, so that the parliamentary committee that has been listening to the views of Kenyans is now preparing its final report and then tables that to Parliament this week. By the time this is done, we're now in early June. Now, I'll get to this final process in a moment, but I want you to note something about Parliament and its fundamental role in this. Between mid-April and May, the Parliamentary Budget Office also helps them by doing a bipartisan review of that budget policy statement, the printed estimates that are prepared in a document known as Unpacking the Printed Estimates and Recurrent Development Expenditures. That document helps MPs better understand the budget being presented. Now, I want us to get to this final stage. As you can see, Parliament already has a role in the budget-making process by the time we get to June 15th, which is when the CS will go before them and the people of Kenya to present the budget for 2023-2024. Now, this is the important part that I want us to pay attention to. On that June 15th, these will be the two bills that will be coming up in Parliament for them to pass. One of them is the Finance Act, which takes a look at the revenue collection measures. How will the government fund this budget that it's talking about? So in the Finance Act is where you have the taxation measures and the revenue raising measures. The second one is the Appropriations Act that then allows government to withdraw from the consolidated fund, essentially to spend. The Finance Act is how you raise the money. The Appropriations Act is what helps them to spend. These two then have to be passed by the 30th of June to then allow us to begin a new financial year on the 1st of July. Actually, this Appropriations Act should be passed at least 4 days to the end of the month. That's around the 26th. Now, what is important about how they will be voting, particularly for the Finance Act, is the MPs will be voting on it clause by clause, proposal by proposal, rather than an omnibus of the finance bill, which is why many Kenyans are looking at Parliament to see how the MPs will be voting. As you can see, then, with these two key pieces of legislation and the entire process, more than any other time in the country's history, due to the Constitution of Kenya 2010, Parliament is tasked with the sole process of the budget-making process, at least in terms of oversight, from start to finish, and not just at the end. It is Parliament that will decide our debt ceiling, our spending, our borrowing, and therefore playing a very key role in the country's economy. That's my explainer tonight. Let's take a break. Back with the day's business.